what exactly are the big ideas that make The Righteous Mind such an influential book? There are many fascinating concepts, but three stood out to me the most. And interestingly, each of them made me rethink not only politics and religion, but also the purpose of education itself. Three big ideas from The Righteous Mind. The Rider and the Elephant. One of the most memorable ideas in this book is Jonathan Haidt's metaphor of the rider and the elephant. Imagine your mind as a person riding an elephant. The rider represents our reasoning, our ability to think logically, analyze evidence, and make arguments. The elephant, on the other hand, represents our intuitions, emotion, instincts, and automatic judgments. Most of us believe that the rider controls the elephant, but Hyde argues something quite different. In reality, the elephant usually decides where to go first, and the rider's job is simply to explain or sometimes justify that decisions afterward. In other words, we often believe that we are making rational decisions, while in reality, our reasoning frequently serves our intuitions rather than directing them. This idea is summarized in one of the book's central arguments: intuition comes first, strategic reasoning second. This was probably the first moment where I paused and reflected on my own experience as an education student. In education, we often assume that if students receive enough evidence, facts, or a logical explanation, they will naturally change their minds. But Heights reminds us that learning is rarely that simple. Students do not enter classroom as empty vessels waiting to receive information. No. They bring identities, emotions, family values, religious belief, political experiences, and even cultural backgrounds. Perhaps this explanation why two students can attend exactly the same class, taught by the same lecturer, and still interpret the lesson in completely different ways. For me, this idea completely changes how I think about teaching. Education is not merely about transferring knowledge, it is also about understanding the human beings who receive that knowledge. The second major contribution of this book is what Haidt calls the moral foundation theory. According to him, human morality is not built upon a single universal principle. Instead, our moral judgments are influenced by several psychological foundations that evolved throughout human history. Haidt introduced six moral foundations. The first one, care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation, liberty versus oppression. Each of us possess this foundation. However, different individuals and different communities prioritize them differently. For example, one person may evaluate an issue primarily through fairness and equality. Another may evaluate the same issues through respect for authority or the protection of sacred values. Neither person is necessarily irrational. They simply begin from different moral priorities. This idea deeply resonated with me because my master program focused on education in the pluralistic society. Throughout our courses, we often discuss diversity in terms of religion, ethnicity, language, gender, or culture. Height adds another important dimension. Perhaps diversity is also moral. Students are not only culturally diverse, they are morally diverse. If educator fails to recognize this, classroom discussion can easily become space where students defend position rather than understanding one another. So, instead of asking, why doesn't this student understand? Perhaps our educators should first ask, what moral foundation is this student using to understand the issue? The simple shift encourages empathy before judgment, and I believe that is one of the most important qualities of an educator can develop. And we move to the last idea. It is about morality both unites and divides us. The third idea is, in my opinion, the most powerful. Haidt argues that morality has two phases. On one hand, morality helps people cooperate. It builds trust, it strengthens communities, it encourages sacrifice for something greater than ourselves. Without morality, societies will struggle to survive. However, morality also has another side. It creates boundaries. It distinguishes us from them. It encourages loyalty toward our own group, but at the same time, it can make us suspicious or even hostile toward those outside it. Haidt beautifully summarizes this idea by suggesting that morality binds and blinds. It binds us together within our own communities, but it can also blind us to the perspective of others. As I reflected on this chapter, I couldn't help thinking about today's educational landscape. Schools are becoming increasingly diverse. Students come from different religions, different political backgrounds, different social classes, different worldviews. If education only teach students how to defend their own beliefs, we may produce highly knowledgeable graduates. But if education also teaches students how to understand why others think differently, perhaps we produce wiser citizens. So to me, this is where the righteous mind becomes much more than a psychology book. It becomes about a book about education, citizenship, and democratic life. Especially in pluralistic society, this agreement should not always be viewed as a failure. Sometimes disagreement is simply evidence that people begin from different moral worlds. The challenge of education, therefore, is not to eliminate disagreement. It is to help a student engage with disagreement respectfully, critically, and compassionately. So these are the three ideas fundamentally changed how I understood this book, but more importantly, they also changed how I understood my own experiences actually. As I close to the final chapter, I realized that I wasn't only thinking about Jonathan Haidt's arguments, I was thinking about home. I was thinking about Aceh,